Hello and welcome to our special coverage of Russian invasion. I'm Olumide Macaulay. The headlines. State Department urges U.S. citizens to leave Russia immediately after Wall Street Journal reporter's arrest. Spokeswoman of Russia's Foreign Ministry, Maria Zakharova, says activities of arrested U.S. reporter not related to journalism. Plus, Austrian lawmakers criticize walkout of far-right freedom party during Zelensky's speech. Thank you for joining us this morning. The U.S. State Deputy Spokesperson Vedant Patel has urged citizens residing or traveling in Russia to leave immediately amidst the arrest of an American reporter accused of espionage, the most serious move against a foreign journalist since Russia invaded Ukraine. It comes after a Moscow court ruled the U.S. national and journalist for the Wall Street Journal, Ivan Gershkovich, should be detained for nearly 2 months on suspicion of spying.
Especially in this room, I know all of you are incredibly concerned about the reports coming out of Russia today, as am I, as is the entire department. I want to say clearly and unequivocally in the strongest terms, we condemn the Kremlin's continued attempts to intimidate, repress, and punish journalists and civil society voices. Unfortunately, we have seen how the Russian government's escalating repression affects journalists as well as civil society activists and the broader Russian community. Since February 24th, 2022, dozens of outlets and more than 100 individual media professionals have been labeled as undesirable organizations or foreign agents for doing their jobs.
That the United States should not use this as, in their view, a pretext to do anything to Russian media.
Due to privacy considerations, I am limited at what I can share, but here are some updates I can offer. First, the U.S. Embassy in Moscow has requested official notification of the arrest, and Russia is required to provide that under our bilateral consular convention. Second, whenever U.S. citizens are arrested abroad, we pursue consular access as soon as possible. However, due to Russia's administrative procedures and security requirements, it will likely be several days before that happens. Third, we are in close contact with the Wall Street Journal on this issue. And also, I would like to make it clear that it is not safe for U.S. citizens to be in the Russian Federation. Any U.S. citizen residing or traveling in Russia should depart immediately, as stated in our latest travel advisory. Those who require assistance in departing Russia should contact the U.S. Embassy in Moscow for assistance.
Well, so on that, can you give us any more detail about it?
And we have not yet heard back from the Russian Foreign Ministry Affairs, but we reached out through the appropriate channels as soon as we were made aware of this reporting.
Evan was an accredited journalist there. Are you saying it's not safe for even people who are accredited, with the ministry or working for international organizations to be there?
Our message to American citizens residing in Russia is that the travel advisory warning is a level 4 and that they should leave.
It looks like they already drew that line that he has been doing something illegal.
It is not helpful for anybody to get into hypotheticals right now, but there's also no reason that anyone should believe these charges as accurate. But currently, our priority is gaining consular access to this individual, which is something we would do in any circumstance when an American national is detained abroad in any part of the world.
So are you concerned about the impact this could have on Paul Whelan's case? And do you have any updates on when he was last given consular visitor a call?
So I think it's really important, Jenny, that we not make comparisons among these cases. The U.S. government continues to engage with the Russian Federation through the established channel to bring Paul Whelan home. His release continues to be an absolute priority, and we have and will continue to engage the Russian government on his case. Consular officers last visited Paul in person at the end of January, and will be speaking to him by phone today.
U.S. State Deputy Spokesperson Vedant Patel taking questions from journalists on the Gershkovich arrest in Russia. Speaking of which, the man in question, 31-year-old Ivan Gershkovich, who's worked in Russia as a journalist for 6 years, is the highest profile American arrested there since basketball star Brittany Griner, who was freed in December after 10 months in jail on drugs charges. The Federal Security Service said it arrested Gershkovich in the Urals industrial city of Yekaterinburg. He was brought to Moscow, where a court at the closed hearing ordered him held in a pre-trial detention until May the 29th. Daniil Berman, a lawyer representing the reporter, said Russian court held quick closed hearing for Gershkovich and was not permitted inside the courtroom or allowed to see the charges. According to the TASS state news agency, he pleaded not guilty. In the meantime, the White House dismissed espionage charges against the Wall Street Journal reporter detained by Russia as ridiculous. White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre said there was no reason to believe the charges are accurate.
Especially in this room, I know all of you are incredibly concerned about the reports coming out of Russia today, as am I, as is the entire department. I want to say clearly and unequivocally in the strongest terms, we condemn the Kremlin's continued attempts to intimidate, repress, and punish journalists and civil society voices.
Last night, senior White House officials spoke directly with Mr. Gershkovich's employer, the Wall Street Journal. The State Department has also been in touch with the Wall Street Journal and his family on this matter. These espionage charges are ridiculous. The targeting of American citizens by Russian government is unacceptable. We condemn the detention of Mr. Gershkovich in the strongest terms. So look, we don't have any specific indication that journalists would be targeted. As we know, this is incredibly, sadly common for Russia to detain Americans, and that's why we've been very clear about Americans not going to Russia. It is not safe, and we have been very clear. There's no reason to believe that those charges are accurate. The espionage are accurate. I don't want to speak beyond that, and certainly we will have more information when we get it. There are privacy concerns, so we just want to be very mindful on how we speak about this. So look, detaining Americans, as my colleague said, my NSC colleague said, is a tactic Russia has used for a long time. It is nothing new. When you think about Paul Whelan, you think about Trevor Reed, they were taken prior to the prior administration, under the prior administration.
Thank you.
Meanwhile, Russian Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Maria Zakharova said the public would have an opportunity to verify Moscow's claim that a U.S. reporter detained on espionage charges we've been reporting had been engaged in activities unrelated to journalism. Espionage under Russian law can be punishable by up to 20 years in jail.
Соответствующие заявления были сделаны по линии.
Under the cover of journalist activity with a press visa and accreditation, this person, judging by the actions undertaken by him and in relation to him, has been involved in a completely different kind of activity. I'm now reading a lot of reports in the Western media saying that he had accreditation from the Foreign Ministry, therefore he's a journalist. No, no, no. This is what he claimed to be. But what he has been doing in Yekaterinburg was not journalism. I do not know if there are any other cases, but the allegations made by our intelligence services today were not related to his journalism. They are related to non-journalistic activity.
Совершенно иной деятельностью.
Yaroslav Shirshikov, a political expert in Yekaterinburg, said he was interviewed by Gershkovich 2 weeks ago and was due to meet him again. Shirshikov said Gershkovich had not said anything about wanting information about a military factory and was not an enemy of Russia.
Он со мной связался, попросил высказаться на тему, значит, отношения гражданского общества к Пригожину в Екатеринбурге. То есть, по его словам, это был главный момент его исследования. Мы встретились с ним, я пригласил к себе в офис, в институт к себе. Мы общались, я его знакомил с некоторыми людьми, тоже, как говорится, у которых он брал комментарии. Вот. Гуляли по городу, я небольшую экскурсию провел. Потом, значит, Эван с фотографом улетели в Москву, а буквально во вторник, то есть позавчера, получается, он мне написал: сможем встретиться в четверг? Я: так, конечно, сможем. Вот, такие дела. Уже сегодня в час ночи, получается. Только я спать лег вчера и уснул, и раздался телефонный звонок.
Away from the Gershkovich arrest, the White House urged Russia to conduct itself professionally when it assumes its scheduled UN Security Council presidency next month, saying there was no means to block Moscow from the post. White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre told a news briefing that the U.S. also expects Russia to continue to use its seat on the council to spread disinformation and justify its actions in Ukraine. Jean-Pierre explained the Security Council's presidency is a position that rotates the council members each month in alphabetical order, and there isn't a feasible international legal pathway to change that reality. Lawmakers at the Austrian parliament strongly criticized members of the pro-Russia far-right Freedom Party as they walked out of the lower house of Austria's parliament during a speech by Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky protesting that it violates Austria's neutrality. President Zelensky, addressing the chamber via video link, thanking Russia for its humanitarian aid and help with projects such as clearing landmines. As part of his speech, Austria says its neutrality prevents it from military involvement in the conflict. And while it supports Ukraine politically, it cannot send the country weapons in its fight against the Russian invasion. We'll show you the movement from lawmakers from the pro-Russia far-right Freedom Party who walked out of the lower house of the Austrian parliament. And there you have it, them walking out. The Freedom Party had warned, however, days before that it would hold some form of protest against President Zelensky's address. And that's the form it took. Its lawmakers attended the start of the speech and then they left. Lawmakers who walked out of the chamber left small placards on their desks featuring their party logo and either space for neutrality or space for peace. Of the 5 parties in the parliament, the FPO has the 3rd biggest number of seats in the lower house. It currently has a slight lead in opinion polls over the opposition Social Democrats and the Chancellor Karl Nehammer's Conservatives, who govern in coalition with the left-wing Greens. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky marked 400 days of war, thanking the people of Ukraine for the collective struggle. Speaking during his daily evening address, President Zelensky expressed a thought for anyone who supported the country and helped since the Russian invasion started in February 2022. In the same address, he also thanked the Austrian parliament, as we reported earlier, for their support towards Ukraine. Taiwan's relationship with the United States has never been closer. That's according to its president, Tsai Ing-wen, after arriving in New York City on Wednesday, as Beijing warned her visit could lead to serious confrontation between China and the U.S. A banquet with members of the Taiwanese American community. At that banquet, Tsai said Taiwan faced tremendous challenges. In her words, we know that we are stronger when we stand together in solidarity with fellow democracies. Taiwan cannot be isolated, and we do not take friendship for granted. Tsai's visit comes at a time of heightened tension between the U.S. and China and has sparked already sharp condemnation from Beijing, which claims democratic Taiwan as its territory despite never having controlled it. King Charles III and his wife, Queen Consort Camilla, have visited a weekly outdoor market in Berlin on their 2nd day of the King's first state visit abroad since becoming British monarch. At the market, the royals got a chance to taste organic products from the Brandenburg region, including cheese, meat, and honey. A big crowd of people gathered there to greet King Charles and Camilla, who then took time to chat and take pictures with some of them. Over a three-day visit to Berlin, Brandenburg in the east and the northern port city of Hamburg, King Charles will attend engagements reflecting issues facing both countries, such as environmental sustainability and the Ukraine crisis, and will also commemorate the past. Now we're pleased to talk to Mr. Chidi Wanu, a security expert joining us from out of London. Good morning and you're welcome to the program.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Let's begin with the Gershkovich arrest. In the days of the KGB, some have called it the KG used to be because it's defunct, obviously, and has transformed to the FSB. Spies, and during the Cold War, took a more ominous connotation, and spying. You had the spy, the traditional spy. You had the double agents, the treacherous double agent. Then you had the very treacherous triple agents when that happened. But now it appears that this war also has a dimension of spying involved in it. Are these accusations, do they have any merit at all, in your view?
I would say in this particular case, without any of us knowing the specifics of the case, I would say with maybe 70% certainty that this is not really an espionage case. It's almost, but again, with 70% certainty, almost definitely political bargaining. He's most likely been set up, most likely been offered something which he wouldn't have known was or covered as a military secret in Russia. And then being captured on that basis. This is it's not something new. It's something that the Soviet Union and the Russians have done quite repeatedly. And not just the Soviet Union and Russia. Many other countries, including Western powers, use this method to entrap people who they believe to be espionage agents. But in this case, I do not believe the Russians think he's an espionage agent. Again, unless something that we don't know about is revealed. It's most likely he's been captured as a pawn, as some way to again put pressure on the Americans and the Western powers.
We'll think that the Wall Street Journal will also be more careful in sending out their reporters in cases such as this, knowing that there's tension between the U.S. and Russia, and here he is in the heart of the country doing his job. He has accreditation to do it, but what did he expect? We know that relationship is frosty between both countries.
Well, see, this is the interesting thing in that most, there is a certain, if you would say, gentleman's agreement that people will understand that, journalists are generally off limits as long as they stay within certain parameters. Again, journalists are a perfect cover for lots of spies, but in this case, he's a journalist for a fairly major, news organization. So it's unlikely that he would be a spy. So somebody like that has too high a profile to be, to work effectively as an intelligence agent. And any, diplomat or, spy, as it were, working in Russia, is automatically, or foreign, correspondent is automatically on the in the crosshairs of the FSB. So it's very unlikely. I mean, as I said, nothing is ever impossible. You could find something out later on, but it's very unlikely that he was actually a spy. What you're seeing here is Russia escalating. Again in the one realm that it does have escalatory power. It no longer is able to escalate on the battlefield because it no longer has that capability. Its forces, no longer have the ability to conduct major offensives, capture territory the same way it did earlier in the year. Its strategic air campaign against Ukrainian infrastructure hasn't worked. Its nuclear threats haven't worked. So Russia is now in the position where it has to find somewhere to escalate that, where it can, have some sort of an effect on the West. And the only way it can do it is this kind of hostage diplomacy. So by taking him prisoner, he'll definitely be convicted. And in some, in a few years, most likely he'll be exchanged for somebody else or released as a sign of goodwill. But this is, I wouldn't consider this to be an espionage situation. I think it's purely, about brinkmanship and trying to reestablish escalation dominance.
Yes, you make a very good point of it being too obvious, as it were. Spying is a very covert operation, and it's something that is very high-level espionage. So it'll be too predictable for such a high-profile, such an obvious reporter to be doing such a thing. But let's look at the Austrian walkout now of the supporters of the Freedom Party that walked out in the lower house of Austria's parliament. They say neutrality is the order of the day and that should be respected. They have a point, no?
Yes, they do have a point in that Austria is technically neutral in its constitution and its international affairs. So from a purely legal and you could even argue, you know, kind of geopolitical point of view, they're correct. You know, Austria's neutrality should be respected, but there's no, I mean, the only way you could say, there's no way you can say hosting Zelensky is violating Austria's neutrality. I mean, Austria isn't supplying weapons, or Austria isn't, you know, providing lethal military equipment. So they're still maintaining their neutrality, as it were, and they're even preventing, you know, the dispatch of Austrian equipment that's been made, you know, by Austrians sold to other countries. So they're maintaining their neutrality. A presentation to Parliament isn't a violation of that per se. It might not be within the very, you know, narrow confines of neutrality, but we obviously, everybody sees this for what it is. It's a party that is broadly pro-Putin, pro-Russia, anti what, you know, you would consider to be the establishment West, you know, making a point. This is a great opportunity for them to, you know, raise their profile. And it's a good opportunity for Russia. This will be heavily messaged on Russian social media and traditional media channels as, you know, divisions in Europe, you know, Austria not being, the Austrian government, you know, not being supported by some people. It's a stunt, it's propaganda, but, you know, it's based on a genuine principle of neutrality.
Mr. Wanu, do you think, therefore, we're coming to a watershed moment in international diplomacy where countries who stay in the middle and sit on the fence concerning support for the war militarily or in more tangible ways are seen as supporting Russian aggression?
I think that, to be brutally honest, I think that moment has actually passed, because when we've seen at the beginning of the war, especially countries like India, countries like, you know, well, not necessarily China, but, you know, countries like India, South Africa, who refused to condemn the war, and, you know, in the case of South Africa and India, have still maintained their close relations with Russia. You know, they were, you know, accused quite liberally of being, you know, pro-Russian, you know, and all of this, you know, kind of statements. But that hasn't deterred them. They, you know, the South Africans have just conducted an exercise with the Russians. They still hosted, you know, Russian officials. I think that point has passed. I think the world has settled quite clearly into its camps. You know, you've got the overtly pro-Russian camp, you know, Iran, Syria, you know, those North Korea, those few isolated nations. You've got the heavily, or the pro-Russian neutrals like China, India, South Africa, and then you've got everybody else who just, you know, wants to mind their business and get along with it, you know, get along with life, you know, just sitting there off into the corner. I don't think you're going to find much change in either position. Many of these countries have made these decisions not from emotional perspectives or from, except maybe South Africa, or from any other kind of perspective. It's purely from a transactional state of mind. You know, India depends on Russia for a huge amount of its weaponry. They've got lots of joint ventures in terms of weapons manufacture. And they're also, because of the sanctions, they're getting very, very cheap oil from Russia by buying it, you know, in their own currency and buying it at a massive discount. So it's very much in their strategic interest to continue, you know, supporting Russia. China, you know, benefits from, you know, Russia being in a conflict with the West. You know, China and Russia are rivals, whether, you know, they're currently, you know, at each other's throat now then or not. They are rivals, they're neighbors. There's been tension between those countries for centuries. So for Russia to be, you know, wasting all this military strength, you know, in a war in Ukraine, it's great for China. For Russia to be, you know, holding the West's attention and, you know, demonstrating to China how the West would most likely react to an invasion of Taiwan is great for China. But at the same time, you know, the effect on the world economy is bad for China. So they have a strategic interest in balancing all of these competing these competing effects. And then I would say for South Africa, that their involvement in BRICS is a key kind of driver for their policy, but also, their history of Soviet support for the anti-apartheid struggle makes them loath to oppose Russia, and also their opposition to the U.S. interventions in Libya, in Iraq. That was standard South African foreign policy, and their predictions proved to be right. So from their perspective, they were on the right side of history then. They're most likely on the right side of history now. So there is, as I said, while there's an emotional element, there was also a practical element to it.
A thin line, therefore, between neutrality and acquiescence. Thank you for your contributions to the program this morning. Mr. Chidi Nwanu speaking to us from out of London, a security expert.
Thanks for having me.
Local authorities report one man has been killed and a woman wounded by Russian shelling in the Ukrainian town in Zaporizhzhia region. The shelling comes as the head of the UN nuclear watchdog visited Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant for the second time in less than 7 months on Wednesday. Rafael Grossi told Russian media the situation was not improving. The IAEA head did not name specific safety measures that could be proposed. Russia said in February that it was close to completing construction of protective structures for key parts of Zaporizhzhia, including storage of radioactive material. The foreign ministers of NATO's eastern flank have arrived in Poland to take part in the Bucharest 9 summit in Lodz. The Bucharest 9, a Polish-Romanian initiative, focuses on security in the Black Sea region and Ukraine. The group, made up of Bulgaria, the Czech Republic, Estonia, Hungary, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, Romania, and Slovakia, met for the last time in February, meeting U.S. President Joe Biden as he visited Poland. The foreign ministers from Central and Eastern European countries will meet with NATO, U.S., Spain, Sweden, and Finland officials today. Finns welcome the prospect of NATO membership as Turkey's parliament ready to vote to ratify Finland's membership bid, even as it keeps Sweden's application on hold. The Turkish vote will remove the last major hurdle to Helsinki's accession, and Finns had a positive view of the potential membership. 28 of NATO's 30 members have ratified the Finnish and Swedish applications to join the alliance, which was founded in 1949, but Turkey and Hungary have held up the process. Hungary's parliament approved a bill this week to allow Finland to join NATO after the Turkish president declared Turkey was ready to approve that bid.
That opinions differ, and some people have been strongly against NATO for long. And also, if I think the big picture, as the whole Finnish opinion, before the war in Ukraine, I think the most, or the big portion of Finns were thinking that we don't need NATO, that we are safe enough, we are okay without it. But I think it was quite clear when we saw the war happening that the popular opinion changed quite quickly with Finns and even with politicians, but mostly even with the people, with Finns. So I think we are ready for it. I think it brings safety for us.
Well, I believe that in this kind of environment, political environment nowadays, I believe that there is definitely strength in numbers, and there is good opportunity now that we can all be united under this NATO banner, and no longer maybe be under any kind of threats.
Romanian air, sea, and ground forces took part in a NATO-led drill in the Black Sea, assisted by U.S. air surveillance. The drill, part of the Sea Shield 2023 exercise, simulated an enemy attack on one of the Danube shorelines, some 30 kilometers from Ukraine in the Danube Delta. 3,400 personnel from Albania, Bulgaria, France, Georgia, Greece, Poland, Portugal, the United Kingdom, the Netherlands, Moldova, the United States, and Turkey are taking part in the exercises alongside Romanian forces until Tuesday, April the 4th. Sea Shield 2023, which began on March the 20th, involves naval ships and aircraft along with other patrol vehicles. The drills also include participation from anti-explosive divers and specialists in chemical, biological, and nuclear defense. Now we're much obliged to talk to Major General Henry Ayola, former commander, Operation Safe Haven, Chief of Defense, Research and Development. He joins us from our Abuja studios in the Federal Capital Territory. You're welcome to the program.
Thank you very much, Lumide. Good morning, viewers.
In a long, drawn-out conflict such as this, is there a danger of battle fatigue setting in on both sides of the war, the Russians and the Ukrainians, because of the mental and physical exertion and the fact that it is long, drawn out? When does battle fatigue set in? Do you see that happening in this war, given that it's over a year since it began?
Yeah, thank you very much. That's a great question to start with. Battle fatigue is inherently one feature that should be expected in any war at all, particularly when the war becomes protracted. There are many factors that are responsible for that. I mean, first of all, battle fatigue means, the outcome of stress of war, the vicissitudes of war, the vagaries of war, the tension, and all the abnormalities that are associated with war. Of course, soldiers are human beings after all, so notwithstanding the quality and the level of their training, after a while, battle fatigue will certainly begin to set in. One of the factors really is the cost of war itself. Gone are the days, in the past, in those days, soldiers didn't necessarily need to know why they are going to war. Because don't forget, the choice to go to war, the decision about war is a political decision. The soldiers are not privy to it ordinarily. But in the information age we are in, they have the access to know why their government is going to war. And so that from the beginning can be a factor that will determine how long their endurance will last at war. That's one factor. A very important factor, of course, next is the length of the war itself. Like you have rightly said, it's over a year now. And so, of course, usually operations are planned such that a set of soldiers and officers should stay in operation for about a year for optimum performance. After that, there should be what we call rotation or relief, which should come on a regular, periodical basis so that you can inject new hands, and so that those who have been on the battlefront can have some time to rest and reconnect with their families and all of that. And then, of course, they can be, reinforced later or be brought back later, as the case may be. So that's one. Of course, another very important factor is morale of the troops, which actually derives also, partially from that cause from the beginning. And then, of course, administration in the field by the higher commanders, how effective and how outstanding the higher commanders do, in administering their forces and taking care of them. And of course, the quality of command. Okay, so when all of those are put together, you begin to have, either a way of ameliorating the setting of fatigue, or actually ensuring that those issues are precisely dealt with as to preempt fatigue. Of course, another factor is the issue of reinforcement and replenishment. Very important, because the soldiers are aware. When they see a tank blown up and they can see the tank replaced either so immediately or the tracks are changed, and all of those things are available, and they're able to put the tank back into battle. All of that boosts their morale. They then know that, oh, things can be done. Even the issue of casualties. When casualties begin to set in and the numbers begin to increase, and even the casualty evacuation, the means and ways in which they are being done, we encourage the soldiers and their officers and men to, their morale to be kept high such that fatigue don't set in too early. But all of that put together is just to say that if all of these things are in place, no matter how good they are, the issue of having enough troops to rotate as required is very important. For example, the 68th Brigade of Ukraine, the report is that since the war started on the 24th of February last year, they've not had a moment, to get out of action. Now, of course, after a year, certainly, no matter how good your administration in the field is, fatigue will begin to set in. So these are some of the things that need to be handled.
Okay, Major General.
Help to, yes.
Major General, that leads me to something that has bothered me concerning this war, conscription of soldiers. We see a lot of conscription on the part of the Russians and some from the Ukrainians. Can you expect, as an officer, the same level of dedication and loyalty when you're a conscripted soldier in a war that is arguably unpopular in some parts of Russia and has been suppressed by way of dissent from those who are not in support of it, that is suppressed by the government? Can you expect conscripted soldiers to, in the theater of war, be as loyal as professional soldiers?
Yeah, thank you very much. That's a good question. In fact, it follows from the point of, first, the causes of the war. There is the idea of just wars. In the case where soldiers feel that the war they are fighting is a just war. For example, for the Ukrainians in this setting, for them it's a war of survival, it's a war of national pride and interest. They are defending their territory and their people and their honor and their sovereignty as a nation. So they are more likely to have a higher morale to do it at all costs. But on the Russian side, conscription, apart from conscription, even a reinforcement in itself, when new soldiers are being inducted into battle, it takes some time for them to get used to the battle environment. That's what we call battle inoculation. The time it takes for a new inject into battle, a new inductee, to be like somebody who has been in battle for over 6 months, it takes some good time, no matter how well trained. Not to talk of when they are now conscripted people, which means there is already a shortfall in the level of training they must have gotten. I mean, even if they were reserves, or if they are fresh conscriptions and they are not even reserved, they've never been trained before, certainly you're not going to get the quality of performance, not to talk of the quality of patriotism, and of course the willingness of the hearts and minds being set. Because there's something we talk about in the military. We say you zero your mind. Zeroing of one's mind is what it means is that from the day you've joined the profession of arms, you know that you have willingly relinquished your right to several things. The right of doing what you like, when you like, how you like, you have willingly relinquished them. So when you conscript people, they don't have that kind of mindset here. It will take a whole lot of time. Maybe after they have settled in the battlefront over a long period before they can ever acquire, if they will ever acquire that kind of mindset. So certainly, it's not going to give the commanders the quality performance that we expect from, regular trained soldiers, and the mindset, the patriotism, the endurance, the ability to take risk, the rigor that they can put in. Certainly, it's not going to be the same.
There are reports, Major General, of drills being conducted by other countries, maybe not even directly involved in this conflict. Is this an ominous preparation for an escalation of a wider conflict?
Yeah, very interesting. I was watching the video you showed before this time of NATO forces doing exercises. Generally speaking, I mean, on the neutral perspective, training is inherently a very important thing in the military. I recall one of General Douglas MacArthur's quotes that he says that in no other profession are the penalties of employing untrained personnel so appalling and so irrevocable like in the military. Because, of course, it's one profession where you carry it out at a point when you don't have the opportunity to correct yourself. Because, I mean, more often than not, the penalties is lives lost. So you don't have a second chance. So you can't afford not to train. And there's also the popular saying that the more we sweat in peace, the less we bleed in war. So for us in the military, training is a sine qua non that must be given the right priority. But having said that, we also know from the various kind of security relationships that you have among nations, either it's an alliance or a defense agreement or a defense cooperation or even just partnership, like we have the various kind of security relationships among nations. Because of that setting, once you belong to such an alliance like the NATO, of course you have to do such regular exercises, so that, I mean, it enhances the ability for interoperability and, esprit de corps among, because bringing forces from different nations together is not very easy, to merge them into one single force and be able to fight together as a team. And the military profession is inherently a teamwork. So you got to do that. So you have that going on at the NATO level. We also have Russia, Iraq, and China also doing one, it's going on. But others go on, regularly, even in peacetime. Nigeria is also involved in many African command exercises that involve Nigeria and some of the other African countries. But having said that, we also must remind ourselves that you remember at the beginning of this war, what Russia claimed it was doing was a special military operation, okay? Which ordinarily would be an extension of military exercises and drill. So what I'm saying in essence is that, it can always dovetail to something that becomes a full-blown war. We must not lose sight of that possibility. And so for that reason, one shouldn't take it for granted. I mean, the spokesperson of the National Security Council of the U.S., made a comment about the one going on between Russia, Iran, and China. And of course said that they are keeping watch, and of course you have to do that. We've seen that even at local level in our setting. That's why you find that during military regimes, exercises suffer because no military leader can trust that one military exercise or drill will not dovetail into some coup or something. So it's something to be watched. It's not something to be taken for granted. But they go on normally. But of course, at this time particularly, and one can only say, well, I mean, it's always better to prepare for the worst. Again, in the military, we say it's better to have it and not need it than to need it and not have it. So you prepare for the worst case scenario. If it doesn't turn out to become a war, good. You have lost nothing. Your troops will have been better for it. So that's the way it goes.
What's the military perception of nuclear force? Because when former President Donald Trump was calling the North Korean leader a rocket man, everybody laughed. And it became a sort of a mockery of the North Korean intentions to always test their nuclear weapons and be ready for war. But now they're doing it again. And we know that the Belarus nation has become the port of call for Russia's tactical nuclear weapons, which they say they are going to put there. What is your perception about nuclear warfare, militarily speaking, knowing that it's actually never happened before?
Yeah, thank you very much. I think that's an issue of making the decision between limited war and general war. And we need to, exercise caution in this area. Like our late General Colin Powell will say, a perpetual optimism is a force multiplier. But then we have to tread with cautious optimism in this setting. Now, tactical nuclear weapons have always been there. In fact, Russia has about 2,000 of that in its arsenal. And the difference between tactical nuclear weapons and strategic nuclear weapons is about the load. The tactical nuclear weapons usually carry lower payload and lower yield, between 10 to 100 kilotons of TNT. That's explosive or dynamite, in simple language. And so oftentimes we talk about, we take that for granted. But that's compared, of course, with strategic nuclear weapons that carry between 500 to 800 kilotons. Okay, but then when we realize, we look back at Hiroshima and Nagasaki, when the U.S. dropped the atomic bomb then, the yield was between 15 to 21 kilotons. Okay? Now, so if tactical nuclear weapons are within 10 to 100 kilotons, it means they are as dangerous and can be as devastating and destructive as Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Okay? So it's not like it's a better situation per se. I mean, in absolute terms, it's not just about the yield, it's about the damage that it can cause and about the target it's aimed at. Okay, so for me, I mean, I have a special interest in that area. I mean, being very interested in engineering issues, and I know that it's a no-go area, really. And when we also realize that Putin said, and he has said it severally, that if their territorial integrity is threatened, that is willing to use all means. Now, that's a statement, that tells you that it will be a thin line between limited war and general war as far as it's concerned. In fact, recently, he also walked away from the strategic arms treaty that has been limiting them, and he walked away from it. So that tells you there is an increasing unveiling and removal of the restraints that should be there. And I think, of course, NATO have been noting all that. I guess they will know how to tread cautiously in this matter. Nobody wants, not even the tactical nuclear weapons used. So it's better to work to check the bricksmanship and the escalation of Russia, to put some boundaries to it so that we don't go that route.
The effects of the atom bomb are still being suffered today, even in Japan. Thank you so much for your insights and your perspective on this issue. Really appreciate your making time to be with us. Major General Henry Ayola, former Commander, Operation Safe Haven of Defense Research, Chief of Defense Research and Development.
Thank you very much.
Russian President Vladimir Putin has conceded that Western sanctions designed to stave, or rather starve, the Kremlin of funds for its invasion of Ukraine could deal a blow to Russia's economy. It's a rare admission by the Russian leader, who's repeatedly insisted that Russia's economy remains resilient and that sanctions have hurt Western countries by driving up inflation and energy prices. Putin says Russia's economy had been growing since July, thanks in part to stronger ties with countries of the East and South, likely referring to China and some African countries. He also stressed the importance of domestic demand to the economy, saying it was becoming the leading driver of growth. The International Court of Justice has ordered the United States to pay compensation to Iranian companies after ruling that Washington had illegally allowed courts to freeze their assets. The United Nations top court, also known as the World Court, did not specify the exact amount in its ruling, but said it will be determined in a later phase. And a blow for Tehran, the tribunal in The Hague said it did not have jurisdiction over $1.75 billion in frozen assets from Iran's central bank held in Citibank account in New York, by far the largest amount claimed back by Tehran. And now we join our business correspondent, Ini John Mekwa, for the business perspective on the program this morning. Good morning, Ini. The Russian crude production falling by around 300,000 barrels a day instead of 500,000 barrels That's not what they were expecting.
Yeah, well, the world was expecting that they will cut their output, or they had said they will cut their output by about 500,000 barrels per day because of the reduction in demand for Russian oil, of course, obviously because of the sanctions, you know, but we see as of yesterday that it was reduced by 300,000 barrels, and of course that affected the price because the cut in supply was not as much as expected, so the price, of course, went up. But it also tells to, I mean, the story you read just before this other one about what's happening to the economy, that readmission by President Putin because of things like this, where they have to reduce their outputs, they have to flare their gas because EU, that used to be their major customers or clients, have had to reduce that. Now, let me give some numbers to that story that you read earlier about that readmission by President Putin, because we see that last year, the war started last year in February. Last year, we saw the economy, that's the Russian economy, shrink by 2.1% in 2022. This year and next year, the IMF and World Bank are expecting it to shrink about 3 to 5%. So, I mean, and it's all because of things like this oil and gas that we see that, you know, the demand for that has reduced. And then we also saw that for the first time in a very long time, they had a budget deficit in their budget. That's funding their budget of almost 2 billion rubles. And then we saw that their revenue plunged by 35%. It's no magic, I guess, at the end of the day, because if their sales, the sales of their oil and gas reduces, if the ICT companies that operate in Russia and pay taxes to the Russian government leave, exit, or sell their properties and leave, then you don't expect their revenue to increase. Obviously, you expect it to plunge. In spite of that, the expenditure is increased by about almost 59%, almost 60%, because some of those things that the international world, the Western world, the private companies should be doing for the government is actually doing it for himself. I remember that one of the things that they did was to set up some funds to help businesses still exist, you know, or sometimes even attract businesses into the ICT, which was perforated by a lot of Western companies, and most of those companies have left when the war started.
Now that Cargill, the top commodity agricultural exporter, wants to stop exporting Russian grain, how is that going to change the dynamics?
So the Russian government has said that will not affect them, but I mean, this is a major grain exporter in Russia, and they're doing that because prices have reduced. And remember, some days ago we talked about how wheat and all of that have reduced because they're giving priority to Ukraine, you know, to ship out Ukraine wheat and all of that. And so the people around there, the farmers around there, are suffering now. You also have the Russian wheat exporters also suffering because they're selling cheap oil. Russia is selling cheap oil. Are they also selling cheap wheat? We did not hear that because the sanction is not supposed to directly affect wheat, but it affects the transportation and logistics involved in moving food items, fertilizer from Russia to other countries. And this is obviously a headache for them, which is why they want to stop. While the government has said this may not affect the whole chain, the architecture of you know, export of wheat and all of that.
Will it affect Cargill themselves? How will it affect Cargill? How much of a big dent will it be in their finances?
It will be a big one for them. I mean, if a company that used to export wheat is no longer doing that and maybe only selling to domestic, how much can they sell to those to fill domestic demand? So it's obviously going to affect them. Perhaps they have other plans, but at this time we do know that the sanction is a large stop for them to do anything they want to do with other countries.
Many thanks, Ini.
Thank you for having me.
Ini John Mekwa. Finally, on the program, the president of the International Olympic Committee, IOC, has slammed European governments' reaction to a plan to reinstate Russian and Belarusian athletes to international sport despite a ban over the invasion of Ukraine. Governments in Ukraine, Poland, the UK, the Czech Republic, amongst others, have been angered by the IOC's plan for Russian and Belarusian athletes to compete again, saying they have no place in world sport with the war still ongoing. Germany's Olympic Committee is also opposed to any Russian return to sport. The IOC on Tuesday issued a set of recommendations to individual Olympic sport bodies by which they could decide to approve individual Russian all Belarusians to compete as neutrals while continuing a ban from team sports. This does not include the 2024 Olympics in Paris, a separate decision, and that will be taken at a later date. And that's it for this edition of our special coverage of Russian invasion. I'm Olumide Macaulay. Have a great weekend.